Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Sunday, October 6th, 2024, and today we are going to be talking about the 538 presidential election forecast 1 month out from the presidential election. A lot of you guys have been closely watching forecasts from a variety of different sources, whether it's 538 or JHK forecast, and again, so many other places. What we wanted to understand today is the forecast from 538, which I honestly do regard as one of the best across the nation. I think on par with that of Nate Silver, and it's slightly better than the Economist forecast. I think this is one of the most interesting ones because it's the most interactive and provides the most information, and for a free price, obviously because they're owned by ABC News and have the ability to do so. But I do think this to be one of the best forecasts that we have in the market today, and I want to analyze it 1 month out from the election. And I've done these videos quite a few times in previous elections. I did it in 2018, I did it in 2020, I did it in 2022, and I usually do it roughly 1 month before the election because it gives us a snapshot in time where the election stands today. And genuinely, now that we're like 30 days away, we are in a position where this race is getting much more competitive than it was before. And I find that to be very interesting, right? You're looking at a state like Florida, a state like Texas, state like Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania over time. You're tracking it. You're starting to see things fluctuate in and out. Is this state going to become competitive for the first time ever? Is this state going to become solid for the first time ever? It is really, really interesting to watch the horse race. And so I wanted to just look at it in broad strokes level, take a look at these individual states for just a few moments to help us understand and ground ourselves. 538's forecast today, which gives Kamala Harris a 55% chance of victory and Donald Trump a 45% chance of victory. And so, as you know, this election is really, really competitive. We have known this from the very beginning. The way that it was set up, the way that the swap out of the nominee happened, the way that this race has really shown the polls have narrowed quite tremendously compared to 2020 and arguably even 2016. The only saving grace and silver lining here really for Democrats from the 2022 midterms is that it showed that despite national numbers being quite accurate, meaning Republicans were expected to win the national popular vote, and they did to nearly a T based on the forecast and based on the margins of predicted victory based on the polls from both 538 and Real Clear Politics, Democrats still can win battleground states and far outperform and exceed what the expectations were for them leading into that election. Meaning when you're taking a look at the polls in a state like Arizona, where Republicans are supposed to win the governor and Senate race and Democrats win both, you start to understand that it isn't just a scenario in which Republicans are underestimated in the polls, but also that Democrats can be too. And so 55 to 45, let's get back to this forecast. Let's understand exactly what is driving this really, really narrow race, but also this slight advantage for Kamala Harris that she really has maintained over the past, 2 months since she has become the presumptive Democratic nominee for president. And you can see that really tracked in the win probability point, where Kamala Harris did reach high points, right? On September 18th, she was at a 64% chance of victory. 3 weeks later, 2 weeks later, she's down to just 55%. It's also up from where she was at the start of this forecast. July 26th, Donald Trump had an upper hand, 53 to 47, and while that lead did sort of, last for just a little while, it lasted for about 2 to 3 weeks. And so then it eventually flipped over, Kamala Harris took the lead, and since then, she has maintained an advantage nationwide. But it is starting to narrow up. It is starting to get a lot closer than where it was before. 55 to 45 is a lot closer than 64-36. And so, again, things have certainly fluctuated, and I really want to understand what we're seeing here. What I do also want to understand is the popular vote structure. What is expected of the national vote share for Democrats and Republicans? Well, Kamala Harris is expected to win the popular vote. That's no real shock to anybody. 51.4% of the vote to Donald Trump's 48.6%. And so to put this in context, what this actually means is that this margin would be, roughly 3 points across the country, right? This would be a 2.8% margin of victory for that of Kamala Harris. Now, 2.8% is not massive, right? It is not something that Democrats would be flaunting in any other election, but it is one that is a slight improvement of that of Hillary Clinton in 2016, but an underperformance of that of Biden in 2020 when he won by 4.5%. So that's probably why the win probability is a lot closer, because it is a lot closer than it was in 2020, but slightly better for Democrats than 2016. Again, sort of translates to that. In terms of electoral vote count, the average number of electoral votes that Kamala Harris was supposed to get and is supposed to get, according to this forecast, is 277. Now, even at her high point, she was at just 300 electoral votes, which means, you wouldn't really see any states flip from the 2020 election cycle. It would be actually a reduction in support from that point. And so even then, at the highest point for Kamala Harris, she was not on track to outperform her 2020 numbers. But what we're looking at here is a far closer race than many Democrats and Republicans honestly are expecting, given that both sides of the aisle fully do expect their respective candidates to win the presidential election. So win probability, 55-45, electoral vote count, 277 to 261, and popular vote, 51.4 to 48.6. Now, let's dive deep into these states. Let's talk about them, and let's talk about which races are going to be the closest, which races are going to be the most interesting, because I really do think We're going to be up really late on election night, potentially for days, watching these ballots get counted. Hopefully, right, based on some of the states that do count their ballots very early, North Carolina is going to be one of those. We will have better indications of who we expect to win, how we expect them to win, what we expect them to win by, all of these different things. And we'll be tracking that and analyzing it throughout election night and throughout election week, as we dubbed it back in 2020 that we might be in for again in 2024. But back to the point here. Where are the numbers showing Kamala Harris in the advantage, Donald Trump in the advantage? And it really does break down to a divide based on the belts. The Sun Belt and the Rust Belt. The Sun Belt region, North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Arizona, better news for Trump than the Rust Belt. The Rust Belt being Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, which have better news for Kamala Harris. And we can really look at that, right? A lot of these races are just at its core value very, very close and competitive, but it is clear who has the upper hand and in what regions they have the upper hand. For instance, Wisconsin is a perfect example. Kamala Harris holds a 59% chance of victory to Donald Trump's 41%. In Pennsylvania, Kamala Harris holds a 53% advantage to Donald Trump's 47%. In Michigan, 59 to 41. These three states make up that Rust Belt region of the United States. But back down to that Sun Belt. Florida is 72 to 28 for Trump. Georgia is 57 to 43 for Trump. North Carolina is 55 to 45 for Trump. And Arizona is 57 to 43 for Trump. Kamala Harris's advantage really does, in fact, lie within the Rust Belt region and Nebraska's 2nd District, where she holds an 83% chance of winning. Now, Nevada breaks a bit away from the norm. Kamala Harris holds the upper hand, and I do, reemphasize, I do believe that to be true. 55 to 45 is roughly what I would put Nevada at. But beyond that point, and that can honestly be grouped in with that western region of the United States, Arizona shifts away from Kamala Harris. Georgia shifts away from Kamala Harris. North Carolina does too. And the thing is, at different periods of time, Kamala Harris did maintain an advantage in these states, right? On September 18th, Kamala Harris had the upper hand in the state of North Carolina. When you look at Arizona, you can see back on September 18th, that's when Kamala Harris had the upper hand in the state of Arizona. You can see in Georgia, very similar story here. Back on September 18th, Kamala Harris had the upper hand in the state of Georgia. And so it is these states in particular that Kamala Harris used to have the advantage in and was leading in and winning in, all 7 of the Battleground states back in September. And now she's losing in 3 out of the 7. Democrats still hold on to an electoral college victory, but that explains why it has narrowed up quite significantly. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that the polls have changed direction away from Kamala Harris. When we're taking a look, I was making a video on the Senate earlier, so we're going to skip that. Let's take a look at some of these battleground states, right? Let's take a look at Nevada, for instance. Kamala Harris, sure, maintaining an advantage, but still some slight reductions in support. Granted, better than where she was before, but this is not the perfect example. Many of the other states can really show that Trump has expanded his lead, right? When Kamala Harris was neck and neck in August through the DNC, Donald Trump started to take it away, and now he maintains a pretty consistent advantage in these states. When you're looking at Georgia, another perfect example. And the numbers here were never great for Kamala Harris, but they were better, right? She was leading at different periods of time in the advantage point, up ahead Donald Trump, but then he started to take it away, and now he leads by 2 points when she previously led less than a month ago. These things do change practically overnight in American politics, and so do these forecasts. So do the way we understand and analyze the races, because they do represent changes in time. They represent voters that a month ago might have said, I'm voting for Kamala Harris, and today, for whatever reason, might be saying, I'm voting for Donald Trump. It also captures the flip side of things. A month ago, some voters might have been saying, I'm voting for Trump, and honestly, a better example would be 3 months ago when Biden was the Democratic nominee. There could have been plenty of voters, and there were plenty of voters that said, Joe Biden just simply is too old to do the job. I don't want to vote for Donald Trump, but I want to vote for somebody I do think can serve out a full term, and that is Donald Trump. And so you had many voters out there who turned away and rejected the Democratic Party up until Kamala Harris became that nominee, which is why you've seen a massive reduction in support for Donald Trump on the national level, roughly a 5-6 point shift from when Joe Biden dropped out of the race. But that doesn't necessarily translate to landslide victories in some of these battleground states, right? Those leads, that 6 point shift, for instance, when you're looking at Trump versus Biden polls, you can see, right, a 6 point shift in Nevada translates to Kamala Harris being narrowly ahead in that state, right, when compared to Biden. A 6 point shift in Arizona translates to Kamala Harris being narrowly ahead, and that's on the high end a 6 point shift, right? It's more like 5 points, 5.5%. Michigan's another example, right? That would give Kamala Harris, respectively, the lead that she has right now. Pennsylvania, very similar thing. North Carolina, very similar thing. And so again, to that point, Kamala Harris is far outpacing and outperforming Joe Biden's margin. But that simply isn't enough because of the fact that Donald Trump was really defeating Joe Biden pretty excessively in almost every single battleground state. My election prediction before Joe Biden dropped out of the race, I gave Donald Trump 312 electoral votes to Joe Biden's 226. I've said this multiple times, and if you watch my channel quite often, you remember that I say this a lot in reference to that victory for Donald Trump, because it would be the worst Democratic performance for the Democratic Party in the 21st century and the best performance for a Republican in the 21st century. That is where we were at. I mean, that would even go back, the best Republican performance dating back to 1988. Donald Trump would have done phenomenally in that race compared to where he was in 2020, and that's because Joe Biden was unpopular and voters did not want to reelect him. Now with Kamala Harris at the top of the ticket, it isn't that they, all of a sudden want to elect her. Sure, her approvals have surged amongst the American public. The way that voters on the Democratic side and some independents view her has risen quite dramatically from when she was vice president or just at time the vice presidential nominee. But, back to that point, it's still a close race. And so it is these states too, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, that hand Kamala Harris this victory. It is not North Carolina. It is not Georgia. It is not Florida. It is not Arizona. When it comes down to some of these outskirts competitive races, like Texas, Donald Trump still holds an 82% chance of winning that state. In Ohio, Donald Trump still holds an 89% chance of winning that state. In Iowa, an 88% chance of winning that state. These states really just aren't competitive. There's a pipe dream out there somewhere in election forecasting world that says Democrats win Texas, they win Iowa, they win Ohio, but that isn't happening this cycle. In 2020, it seemed a lot more plausible, and even then, it wasn't enough. Joe Biden lost Iowa by 8 points, lost Ohio by 8 points, lost Texas by 6 points. Even in a much better year for the Democratic Party nationally, they still couldn't crack that massive advantage that Donald Trump had in Texas, Ohio, and Iowa. Texas narrowed up, Ohio did not, Iowa barely. And so on the overall broad strokes, though, Joe Biden did flip back the Rust Belt, right? Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. He flipped Arizona and Georgia for the first time since the 90s. Those things are impressive and deserve to be applauded. But now this cycle, it looks like we might be on track for Donald Trump to win back some of his states from 2016 while still losing the election. And when it comes down to the closest races based on forecasted margin of victory, North Carolina and Pennsylvania are right up there. Right, North Carolina, Nevada, Pennsylvania, those are the only states expected to be decided by less than 1 point. And again, a lot of that really does make sense. Pennsylvania, very close. Kamala Harris is expected to win by 0.4%. North Carolina, very close. Donald Trump expected to win by 0.9%. Both of these reductions in the opposite direction from the 2020 race. North Carolina went to Trump by 1.3. Pennsylvania went to Biden by 1.2. Now they're seeing a turn in. Nevada, same thing. Shifting away from Biden and the Democratic Party, Kamala Harris still wins the state by 0.9, but not by the margin that Biden did. And the overall shifts in every other state besides Wisconsin, right? Arizona shifts towards Trump, Georgia shifts towards Trump, Michigan shifts towards Trump, but Wisconsin shifts towards Kamala Harris. And it is really fascinating that we're in this predicament where there's a unique appeal seemingly to the white working class voters in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin that doesn't necessarily translate to victories in the battleground states of North Carolina, Georgia, and Arizona. And I think that also just could be a very big regional thing, right? When you're talking about some of the issues that Republicans are actually polling the best on, it is for the messaging in terms of tailored rallies and all these things that the Republican Party and the Democratic Party try to invest in and combat. You're looking at issues like immigration that matter a lot more to voters in the Sun Belt than they do to voters in the Rust Belt. You're taking a look at things like the southern border crisis, which obviously matter a lot more to states like Arizona that are border states than a state like Wisconsin that's a border state for a different country, right? You're talking about very, very, different regions of the country with very different people, very different voting bases, very different electorates. All of it is really different. I mean, you are talking about just fundamentally very, very different races. And yet Kamala Harris has to appeal to them all. So does Donald Trump. And that's where you're going to start to see some of this divide. And the question is, does Kamala Harris win enough in the Rust Belt that it gives her enough secured victory to lose states like Florida, like North Carolina, like Georgia flipping from blue to red, Arizona flipping from blue to red, and even in that circumstance, a state like Nevada, which if Kamala Harris wins Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, and Nebraska second, and every state Hillary Clinton did in 2016 except Nevada, meaning Donald Trump wins that state, Kamala Harris still wins the election. It would be the narrowest race, arguably, that we have ever seen in presidential election history, at least of recent memory, but it would still be an election victory for Kamala Harris nonetheless. And it's something that Democrats might be looking to as a possibility for their pathway forward. All in all, this 538 forecast reaffirms everything we've known so far about this race. It is so exceptionally close, and even the forecasting models can really see it. We can feel it. And when you're looking at the rally sizes for both sides of the aisle, Kamala Harris bringing out 20,000 people, then so does Donald Trump. Right? Kamala Harris brings out 10,000 people in Arizona, so does Donald Trump. You are seeing matched enthusiasm for the first time in a very long time in American politics, and it will be very interesting to watch who actually turns out their base, who actually turns out voters to get out there and vote for their respective party nominees. Because as of right now, it very much is a coin toss. I would slightly bet on Kamala Harris and her campaign, and I do think they hold a slight upper hand today, but that's today. And as you've seen in just about 2 weeks, the forecast narrowed up by around 10 points in a very short and limited period of time, with very limited data points really changing. but ultimately that presidential race is in a very different place than it was before, and it could be in an entirely different place in a month from today. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the top left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen is a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 presidential election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.